little island produces some of the best music in the world. And if we're not making it, we're listening to it. Before streaming, there were CDs. Before that, the cassette. But to many, the greatest music media of all, vinyl. And pushing the envelope of turntable technology for 45 years are electronic wizards Linn in Glasgow.
Linn was founded in 1973 by my father, Ivor Tiefenbrunn. My dad was a mechanical engineer and he loved music. Grew up in a house surrounded by music.
Frustrated with substandard sound and experts focusing just on the speakers, Ivor discovered that acoustic feedback coming from the turntable and speakers was disturbing the vinyl playback.
So his turntable, which he called the Linn LP12, was designed to get the most information out of the groove of the record possible by mounting the tone arm on a separate suspension to the platter. It meant the needle could track the groove more accurately. And with my grandfather's help, they had designed a quiet running central bearing for a turntable that would ensure a really quiet running and acoustically isolated turntable.
A turntable built by audio obsessives for audio obsessives. The LP12 starts at just over £3,500, all the way to a record spinning 18 grand.
The Linn LP12 has been around for almost 50 years. It's the longest continual production piece of hi-fi equipment in history and has been developed gradually and evolved over time. What you're paying for when you buy any LP12 is you're paying for decades of engineering excellence.
And these excellently engineered turntables start with the electronics.
In this area, we manufacture the circuit boards that make up the electronic side of the turntable. A circuit board will start life at the beginning of the production line and will make its way through each of the placement machines, gradually building up the components to create the full, complete circuit board.
The first machine acts as a screen printer, squeegeeing a lead-free solder paste over a stencil, leaving a template for the connections.
The solder paste has two jobs. The first thing it does is it acts as a sticky glue, so that any components the machine places stay exactly where they are placed.
These surface mount placement machines use vacuum suction to pick up and place the components on the boards. They arrive at the factory on giant plastic reels from suppliers around the world. Each reel can hold between 2,000 and 15,000 components. When the circuit boards are assembled, it's time for the solder paste to do job number 2.
The second function happens when the circuit board gets to the oven at the end of the line. We heat the circuit board and eventually the solder paste will melt and become the soldered connection between the component and the circuit board itself.
It happens inside this vapor phase oven. It's basically a sauna for circuit boards. Inside, a special chemical fluid is boiled. The vapor heats the boards to 240 degrees, melting the solder and forming permanent connections. After placement, any large components are fitted by hand and will be tested before assembly. The next stage is machining the platters. Is it lunchtime already?
The rotating platter assembly is the part of the turntable that you sit your vinyl record onto, the part that rotates. It's called a platter after the famous 60s band The Platters.
Really?
I have absolutely no idea why it's called a platter.
Ah, you had me going for a minute.
So this process is the machining of the inner and outer platters of the LP12. We're actually machining the inner platter at the moment, taking it from a cast finish to the final machine finish.
The platters are made from a zinc alloy called zamac, a dense material which helps the platter stay stable when spinning. A CNC lathe spins the solid alloy and a series of diamond-edged cutting tools machine the surface.
Any inconsistencies in the machining will also be replicated in the rotating platter. And what we strive for is stability and accuracy with the rotating platter because that translates to the music that you hear.
And when he says accurate, he means it.
The tolerance that we machine to with the inner and outer platter on this machine is 6 microns. So to put that into perspective, a human hair is approximately 70 microns.
The centre hole is drilled and then bored out before being carefully inspected with micrometers. The platters are sent for a coat of lacquer to protect the surface, The inner will be paired with a larger outer platter during the assembly. Now they just need something to rotate on.
When the LP12 was introduced, the single point bearing was part of the design that helps to isolate from acoustic feedback. That's a phenomenon where the output of the loudspeakers can affect the stylus in the groove of the record.
The bearing that Ivor created was so ahead of its time, the design of the carousel has hardly changed in 45 years. And the latest third generation of the carousel can be retrofitted into every turntable dating all the way back to 1973.
We investigated everything that the bearing does when an LP12 is in operation, and we've made improvements to every facet of that. It's a stronger, stiffer, more reliable piece. It has less friction than ever before, allowing smoother rotation.
Made of stainless steel, it's cast externally, but machined and finished in the factory.
Once it comes to us, we'll machine and insert the polymer bearing linings that sit inside the bearing itself. We also polish and fit the thrust pad. That's a crucial component that sits at the very base of the bearing itself.
The thrust pad is pressed into the base of the bearing and is the only part of the assembly that has contact with other metal.
Once the thrust pad is fitted to the base cap of the bearing housing, the entire bearing is assembled, checked and measured, and is ready for dispatch or for build into any new LP12.
The single point bearing supports the entire rotating platter assembly and is linked to the suspended sub-chassis. Linn's signature spring-mounted frame holds the tone arm and is what keeps the needle in sync with your vinyl.
The suspended sub-chassis here in-house, where they're machined, painted and laser etched.
And with the sub-chassis complete, it's time to put the needle on it.
So this is our tone arm assembly room. It takes approximately between 3 or 4 days to build a batch of 6 arms. It's incredibly labour intensive. The arm itself is made up of hundreds of incredibly small, mechanically precise parts.
A key part of any turntable, the tone arm holds the stylus or the needle. As such, it needs to be rigid and strong, yet able to move in any direction.
So Wilma will fit all of the bearings that are required to support the movement of the tone arm. She'll then check the movement, we'll make sure that it's as precise as possible. She'll then check the tone arm for any noises generated by the bearing itself, and she'll use a stethoscope to check that. The stethoscope test is important because we're listening for the noises that the bearings themselves generate. If the bearings are notchy, or if there's any play in the bearings, that can be heard as distortion in the music that you hear when you listen to your favourite record.
The bearings are also checked to make sure they're neither too tight nor too loose. Wilma attaches the arm to a fixed point and lets it swing. Between 80 to 100 is what she's after. Best make yourselves comfy. Wilma's next job is to run the wires through the arm. They carry the electrical signals that are created by the stylus as it bumps its way through the grooves of a record. The wires transmit the signals to the phono stage, where the sounds are pre-amplified, amplified, and finally released by your speakers.
Now that the tone arm has been manufactured, it's the last part of the chain needed to build a complete turntable. It will then pass through to final assembly, where it will meet the rest of the component parts of the LP12. They will all come together in that final complete turntable.
Not just pioneers in technology, they also took the idea of an assembly line and scrapped it.
We don't use a production line process here at Linn. We use a process called single stage build, where one person will gather together all of the components and sub-assemblies. They will build the entire product. They will test it, and once they're happy with it, they'll put their name on the back of the product. It gives the guys a little bit more pride in what we do here, because their name is carried on the product to all corners of the world.
And shuttling parts from all corners of the factory are some of the longest serving members of staff.
The robotic delivery vehicles that we have here at Linn were actually part of the entire factory design when it was built in the mid-1980s. They'll bring those components and sub-assemblies from the warehousing area of the factory all to this one build station here, where every LP12 is put together.
Assembly starts with mounting the framework and the electronics. The springs are installed to provide the all-important suspension for the sub-assembly. The tone arm is mounted on one side and the carousel bearing and inner platter on the other. A drive belt connects the platter to the motor, and then finally the outer platter sits on top. Build complete, Val carefully tests every part of the turntable.
All I'm doing is I'm making sure all the springs are going in one direction, and that one's sitting really well.
With everything level, Val checks the turntable turns, and crucially, that it turns at the right speed.
Obviously, LPs turn at an industry standard 33 and a third RPM, so we use a stroboscope to check that exactly.
What we're doing is with the motor, we're tilting the motor, we're tilting it away from the inner porter, away. That tightens the belt, that slows it down. If we tighten the other screw on the other side, we tilt it in, and that makes the belt slacker and it makes it go faster. So, and while we adjust it to 33 and a third.
Happy with the handiwork, Val will package it up and send to dispatch.
The dispatch team will then coordinate different pallets going to different retailers all around the world. We are essentially a build-to-order company, so they will create the order for that individual retailer or distributor, and then this turntable that you see behind me will head off on its travels to any corner of the planet.
And with the vinyl resurgence growing every year, the company plans on pushing even more boundaries.
I absolutely hope that vinyl continues to increase in popularity, not just because we make one of the world's best turntables, but because I think it's a great thing that this technology still has room for improvement. We still know that there's more information in the groove of a vinyl record than we've been able to extract right now. So we'll continue to strive to extract more and more music from the groove of your favourite vinyl records.